But that's not all there is to religion, because there are strategies. Once ideas are brought together into an integrated myth that brings together morality and cosmology, it's important for that story to get into the heads of everybody in the culture. We have to organize the stuff in here. And if my sort of organization of my consciousness is similar to the organization of your consciousness, then we have the resources for sharing a common culture. Okay, so it's important to get these brains organized in a similar way so that we will see the world in a similar way. We'll have a sort of intuitive understanding of what problems are and so on. We'll be on the same page, you might say. So it's important to get these ideas into people's heads. And so religious traditions have developed all these strategies for refreshing the story, for maintaining the story, revitalizing the story. And these strategies I've indicated here: intellectual, institutional, ritual, experiential, and aesthetic. Together, they constitute a kind of full court press on the consciousness, right? I mean, these strategies are constantly. It's like keeping a religious tradition together is like sweeping water into a pile. If you've never tried that, you should try it sometime. It takes a lot of work to keep a story alive, and this is what these strategies do. Religious traditions have intellectual strategies. That means they have philosophers or theologians or pundits that are on hand to clarify the myth, to interpret the myth, and also to defend the myth against criticism from the outside. There are institutional strategies. Somebody's got to decide when we're going to meet. Somebody's got to decide who gets to be a priest or a priestess. Somebody has to decide polity, internal polity, for sorting out disagreements within the tradition, and so on. There is also the ritual dimension. Scott Atran is really good on this. If you want to hear more about that, you should ask Scott. Ritual tradition, ritual strategy brings people together so that they can watch each other's behavior in this communal setting. It's also the case that in ritual, when the story is sort of relived, the individual can map on his or her individual story to the cosmic story. Okay, I think this is partly what's going on in the Christian Mass. In the Mass, you have the death and resurrection of the Christ figure, and the individual can map onto that. Everybody here knows what death and resurrection is about. You've had setbacks, you've had losses, you've had to pick up the pieces, dust yourself off, and get going again. You've had to keep on going when things are rough. That's crucifixion and resurrection. And so when we go through the Mass, you can sort of see how that story is, in a way, my story. And ritual helps us to do that. There is also the aesthetic dimension of religious traditions. I think it's a really interesting story to look at early Christianity. Early Christianity never got itself going until it got its art. And so there has to be some sort of objective way, some sort of tangible stuff that gets out there that can excite the imagination of individuals, and so that they will take on the story. Then there is the experiential strategy. Every religious tradition that I know of recommends that individuals have some sort of religious experience. This makes a religious tradition empirical in a way. I mean, if you have a religious experience, that is a personal, direct validation of the story, and it will keep the story alive. It'll keep your head organized around the story. If you talk to God this morning and you come in and hear a demonstration that God doesn't exist, you wouldn't even hear that because you've had this direct experience. And so all these strategies are working together to not only help articulate the story, the central story, but to revitalize it, to keep it active, to transmit it from brain to brain, to keep ourselves organized around this story, so that, okay, now here comes the sort of political and psychological motive, so that we can achieve personal wholeness, that is personal fulfillment, and social coherence. Now, it's my view that we've got to achieve both of those things at the same time, and that's tough, because in a way they compete with each other. Individuals are in competition with society. I mean, everybody wants more from the group than they're entitled to, and the group, for its part, is always demanding more of the individual than the individual has to offer. So personal wholeness and social coherence, while they are mutually dependent, they're also in conflict with each other. And so this is difficult to achieve both of those simultaneously. But I think that's one of the things that stories, religious traditions do. They help us to achieve these things simultaneously. And now we come to the biological function. I think that our best chance as a species, okay, other species have different strategies, but our species, the name of the game in our species is achieve sociality and achieve personality. That is to say, if we can achieve personal wholeness and social coherence simultaneously, we thereby maximize our opportunities for reproductive fitness. So this is what story does for it. That's the way it's structured, and it functions to enhance personal creativity or personal wholeness and social coherence. Now, I'm going to speed by a little bit here and go to this question, because here I think we get some glimpse of what is really at stake. One of the things that I was thinking about yesterday was the very sort of obvious to me fact that Sam Harris and the Taliban are both scared of the same thing. Right? I mean, Sam Harris told us that, hey, we can lose it all, right? I mean, there's this recognition that our life together, our civilized order is a fragile thing, and by God, we could lose it all. That's a real possibility. When we're threatened with that, we want to dig in our heels and worry about it. Well, anyway, here's a sort of typology of different forms of social organization. Anthropologists sometimes use a simple progressive story like this. Originally, of course, our species lived in familial bands, small groups. Actually, I don't think in these small groups there was anything resembling an articulate morality. I think what was going on in familial bands was intuitive morality, and nobody had a set of rules. I mean, if you got out of line, you got a bad look, or you got your face slapped, or something like that. I mean, it's sort of like families. When I'm at home with my family, everybody knows what the limits are. Everybody knows what they can and can't do without any articulate morality. It's only when we get to counterintuitively large social groups, right? I mean, at the level of familial bands, I think morality is pretty much ordained by our genetic inheritance. But when we get into tribal alliances, counterintuitively large social groups, then we need an articulate morality. And when we have an articulate morality, we have to have a story that will justify that morality. And so I think that's where religion originated, in that complex transition from familial bands to tribal alliances. There we got religion. And as we made transitions to more complicated, larger forms of social organization, we had to retell the story so that we could legitimate the instruments of power and the institutions and so on that exist at the higher level. So as we made a transition from tribal alliances, which were pretty much egalitarian, pretty much sharing equally, when we made the transition from that to chiefdoms, where the chief owns everything and is not egalitarian, the chief sort of hands things out, we had to have a new story that would legitimate the role of the chieftain. And as we made a transition from chiefdom to nation state, we had to legitimate the bureaucracy on principles of rational principles of collective civil life. And so we had to have a new story to go along with the transition to the nation state. Now here's where I think things are getting really difficult. This is why I think our conversations here are so consequential. We're stuck really with a choice between transcending this insane notion of 182 or 181 sovereign independent nation states. And we could, in fact, transcend that nation-state system to achieve a kind of global federation. Or we could default back to something a little bit less, perhaps even back to chiefdom. And if we default all the way back, we'll go back to family bands. Well, let's see. One of the things I want to say here is that whenever you get into one of these transition periods, you see sort of widespread, almost systematic breakdown of personal wholeness and social coherence. Things get really tough, and people start looking crazy, and social institutions begin to break down. That's a sort of edge of chaos effect, perhaps. But we have now the possibility of transcending this. How far do you think we're going to get into the 21st century if we have 181 sovereign states that refuse to cooperate in any meaningful way at all? So either we make the transition to a global federation or else we default back. Here is a possibility for a new story that could somehow be consistent with a global federation. Okay, now here I'm basically talking about the story that Carolyn Porco and Neil were working on yesterday. That blows me away, that story. I mean, it just knocks me off my pins. I mean, I've been watching Cosmos. I still watch Cosmos, by the way. Our library has to go and get those tapes, and it wears well, I have to say. This is a great story. It's not a story of, it's not a dualistic cosmology, it's a naturalistic evolutionary cosmology. And it looks to me like there's possibility for a new morality. And I think actually science can help us a lot here because it can inform us about these behavior mediation systems that we have inherited. We know that these behavior mediation systems can be manipulated by symbolic means, okay? So when we get some real pictures from Hubble or wherever to show us the sort of social or the global solidarity that we're capable of, I mean, that moves us. Anyway, what we need then is the articulation of this new story where we pin together a naturalistic evolutionary cosmology with a sustainable sort of trans-anthropocentric morality. And then we have to develop the intellectual, institution, ritual, and aesthetic and experiential strategies to help articulate that story, to transmit it from brain to brain, and to celebrate together. And that, I think, is an exciting prospect. It's going to look ugly in the short term. I mean, you've got two big cultures sort of clashing at each other. The whole world seems to be breaking down in terms of its social coherence. And also, individuals are breaking down in terms of their personal wholeness. But there is hope, I think, in the long term if we can articulate this new story. So I'll just leave it there, and I just want to thank Neil and Carolyn for telling that story. All right.
Great, thank you.